Hey everyone, welcome back. And in this video, let's just go ahead and take a look at the second function which you get in React.Memo, and that is the comparison function. So this comparison function right here would accept two arguments. The first one is going to be previous props and the second one is going to be next props. So what is the difference? How this all works? Well, you see that previous props is going to be the props which were of the previous render, right? Which was just before this render. And the next props is going to be obviously the props which are for the upcoming render. So React asks you that, hey, you can specify your own comparator. By default, React would just do a shallow comparison like this, and he'll say that, hey, if previous props are in fact equal to next props, then we are just gonna not re-render. So this compare function should return true if you do not want to re-render, and should return false if you want to re-render, right? So let's say if I return true here, what's going to happen? Let me just refresh this, and now you can see that it never really re-renders, right? It never really re-renders the whole component. And you can do something interesting. You see, let's say you have a random number like this, and let's say you try to display the random number here as well. So you say props.random, something like that, right? Or maybe like, you can just destruct a random here. So if you do random, hit refresh, well, that didn't work because we had a 0.5 condition. So let's refresh. And now you can see that we have a random number, but if I hover over this, we do not generate the random number again. Why? Because React never really runs your custom li function ever again, because it has memoized it. So if you do a false here, what's going to happen, and this is sort of, what happens even if you do not really write this comparator by default, right? We saw that it was re-rendering on every single thing. So by default, you can see it re-renders all the time. So you can have some fun here. You can say return math.random is greater than 0.5. Now what's gonna do is 50% of the time it's gonna re-render. And in fact, it's funny because this comparator function will run individually for every single item. So you can see, you can sort of create a race among the LIs, right? So you can see which LI is the unluckiest, that it gets re-rendered again and again. So you can see in our experience, the unluckiest LI is this hello world 3 because it gets rendered 55 times, and the luckiest one is the 1 and 5, right? And 2 as well, which are rendered 47 times. So you can have some race like this with a random comparison, but obviously the real benefit is when you do a previous props and next props comparison, right? So in order to do that, what we can do is we can change this logic a little bit. So let's say I have an active property here, or maybe like active index, right? And maybe like current index as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say active index, and set active index is a property which starts with 0, and then current index will get within this, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say active index is active index, and current index is going to be 0, right? So we can do this for every single li which we have in here. And for current index, we can do 1, 2. Well, this is a bad way of doing this. Probably a map would have been a better one, but anyway, who cares? Now, once we have done that, we can get rid of the random here. And what we can do is we can say that, hey, if active index is equal to index, then I want a green, otherwise I want a pink, right? And we can get rid of this whole logic except for the useRef. And let's see what else do we want to do? We want to get rid of this, and what we want to do is probably create an input field, input type text, value active index, and on change, what we want to do is set active index as %e.target.value, right? So we get the E here. So what we are essentially doing, and we can change this to number so that it's easier. So now what we are doing is we start with an active index and then set the current index, and basically inside this function we say that if active index is equal to our index, then we have a green color, otherwise we have a pink color. And this is a slightly wrong because this should be just index, right? Not current index. So there we go. It starts working. Now if I go ahead and get into the UL, and actually do we have a bad logic? Yep. Let's remove this for now, or just keep it like this, right? So now if I refresh, you see we have a performance render. But if I go ahead and start hovering, or not really hovering, start changing this, you can see now we are re-rendering all the children, right? Now you might think that, hey, we have already memoized a component, then why is the re-rendering happen for all the LIs? And that is because you are changing the active index, even though the index prop is fine. Now, what happens is that, even though the index prop changes, we don't really want to re-render these pink LIs, right? Because, well, we don't really care that they are not active. We just want to re-render the active one. So how do you do that? Well, that's exactly one of the use cases of the compare function. So what compare can do is it can become aware of the props, because React is not really aware of the props. So you can say previous props and next props. And what I can say here is that if previous props dot active index is, let's say, is not equal to next props dot active index, that means we have a possibility of a re-render, right? So when exactly would it re-render? It will re-render if next props dot active index is equal to let's say next props dot index. It does not really depend what you write here, because index never really changes, at least in this case. So now re-render. Now we want to re-render. Why? Because, well, it's time to make this active. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say return false, because at this point these props are not active, or at least the state is not same. Otherwise, in every other case, I'm just going to say return true. Why? Because we don't really want to re-render that stuff. So let's just go ahead and refresh this. And now when I try to increase, we're going to have a weird error. And that is completely fine if you think about it, because, well, you are actually doing a bit of wrong, because we have a couple of cases, not really just the first one. We also want to return false if previous props dot active index was equal to previous props dot index, right? Because in this case, if this was the active index and the active indexes are not same, then we know that the current element, which was already active, is not active anymore. So I can say now re-render to this as well, right? So now if I refresh this, if I increase this, you can see only these two guys re-rendered. And this is fine because, it needs to change its state to pink. So it needs to re-render, and this needs to change its state to green. So it needs to re-render. But you see, these other 4, 5, 6 guys do not re-render, which is pretty much exactly what we want. So if I go ahead down, 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 you can see it looks and it works pretty much the way we would expect it to, right? Because, you don't really get unnecessary re-renders. So that's pretty cool. I hope you understood how the comparison function would work like, and how this would work in sort of a data set which is going to be, let's say, highly high and highly large in sorts of data. And that's how you can save a lot of computation by memoizing it correctly with a comparator function, depending on your use case. So yeah, that's pretty much it for this video. I'm going to see you in the next one really soon.